Two men drove the same 11 miles of Highway 43 17 minutes apart, and they told me two different stories about it, and I believed the wrong one first. The first was my cousin Royce. He came into the Grove at 6:35 with his tie already off and said there had been a wreck south of Ellinger, a bad one, and CHP was turning everybody onto the frontage road, and he'd sat in it 40 minutes. He was annoyed the way people are annoyed when they've missed something they didn't especially want to attend. He asked if there was still food. The second was Manny Portillo, who works the front counter at my husband's tire shop. He got there at 6:52. I asked him if the wreck was cleared, and he looked at me like I'd asked him about a different road entirely. There wasn't a wreck, he said. There weren't any patrol cars. There were just cars stopped in both lanes with their doors open and people standing around outside of them in the heat, and a man walking down the middle of the yellow line, and he'd gone up onto the shoulder and around the whole thing at about 10 miles an hour, and nobody had said a word to him. 17 minutes. Same 11 miles. I remember thinking, one of them isn't paying attention. That's what I decided. I decided one of them wasn't paying attention, and I went back inside to find out why the cake table hadn't been moved. My name is Delia. I was 41 that September, and I'd been the office manager at Kettner Pump and Well and Rideout for 9 years, which mostly means I scheduled rigs, argued with people about deposits, and knew the section and township of every dry hole in the south half of Sumner County. It's not a job that prepares you for anything except talking to angry people on the phone without raising your voice. That turned out to be worth something, but not as much as I'd have liked. I was getting married for the first time at 41, to Wes Bauman, who runs Bauman Tire on the highway side of Rideout and who is 4 years older than me, and had also never been married, which people found funnier than we did. We'd been together 6 years. We got married in September because that's when the almond harvest is done and the citrus isn't in yet, and everybody we knew could actually take a Saturday off. Nobody in that county schedules anything around romance. You schedule around the crop. The venue was a place called Vasquez Grove, which is exactly what it sounds like, a family's old naval orange block outside of Callender that they'd stopped farming and started renting out. 20 rows of trees they kept alive for the pictures, a gravel lot, a long steel pole barn open on 2 sides with a concrete pad and string lights and industrial fans mounted in the corners, and a smaller stucco building with the bathrooms and a catering kitchen. It cost less than anywhere in town, and it looked better in photographs. The nearest neighbor was a pistachio huller a mile north. The nearest thing you could call a town was Callender, population maybe 900, 4 miles east. It was 104 degrees at 3 in the afternoon. That's not remarkable there in September. We'd moved the ceremony to 6 for exactly that reason. And even at 6, the concrete was still giving heat back up through the soles of your shoes. 142 people had said yes. About half were local Wes's people, the Baumans, who'd milked cows south of Ellinger until 2016, and then sold the herd and kept the ground for hay, and all their cousins and hired men and the whole apparatus of a family that's been in one place 4 generations. The other half were mine, and mine were scattered, and most of mine were driving up from the south that afternoon. Bakersfield, Delano, a few from Los Angeles. 2 hours, some of them. They'd all come up 43 or up 99 and cut over. I want to be careful here. I've told this to people who weren't there, and I can hear how it sounds when I lay the clues out in a row, like I was standing in that grove watching a thing assemble itself. That's not how it was. I was managing a wedding. A wedding is a logistics problem with music. My entire attention that day was on chairs, ice, the fact that the officiant's Bluetooth speaker wouldn't pair, and whether my mother was going to say something to Wes's mother about the flowers. The first thing that was out of order, and I only call it first because of where I ended up, was the chair rental. At 10 after 3, a flatbed trailer came down the gravel with a Ridgeline Party Rentals sign on the truck door. 2 guys got out. They weren't supposed to be there until Sunday morning. That was in the contract. I'd read the contract. I'd initialed the pickup window. They started stacking the white folding chairs off the far end of the pad. The 80. We hadn't set out yet because we only needed 120 for the ceremony. I went over. I was in a t-shirt and shorts still, hair up, an hour and a half from having to be a bride. I said, "Those are ours until Sunday." The older one said they'd had a change in the schedule. He was polite about it. He didn't look at me much. He kept looking east, past me, at the road, the way you look when you're waiting for someone to come pick you up. I asked if this was going to change what we owed, because we'd paid a deposit and there was a balance due at pickup, and I'd written the check that morning and it was in my bag in the stucco building. He said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "Don't worry about it," meaning what meaning you'll invoice me. He said something like, "We'll get it squared away," and then he asked me if the road east out of Callender goes through to 65, and I said, "Yes, but it's slow. Why don't you go back the way you came?" And he said they weren't going back that way. They took the 80 chairs and they left, and they did not have me sign anything. And in 9 years of dealing with vendors in that county, I had never once had a man load equipment onto a trailer and drive off without a signature. I stood in the gravel and thought, they double booked. They're embarrassed. They're going to eat the balance and hope I don't complain online. That is a completely reasonable thing to think. It's what I'd think again. I only bring it up because when I tell people about that day, that's the part they always stop me on. Not the highway, not what came later. The chairs. By 4:30 I was dressed and I'd started to feel the shape of a different problem, which was that the parking lot was wrong. I'd built the seating chart myself, at my kitchen table, twice, and I could have told you where every one of 142 people was supposed to be sitting, so I could look at that gravel lot and know who was in it. Wes's side had come early, because farm people come early, and they'd parked in the first 3 rows, and their vehicles told you everything about them. 3/4-ton diesels, mostly white, mostly with toolboxes across the bed, a couple of flatbeds. Carl Bauman's dually with his 5th-wheel travel trailer still hitched because he and Junie had driven it up from a week at the coast and hadn't wanted to go home first and turn around. And then there was a whole section of the lot that was just empty. 9 cars I was expecting from the south weren't there. My Aunt Charlotte, my cousin Royce and his wife, the Salgados, who were family friends from when my dad was still working, 2 carloads from Bakersfield, my mother's church friend and her husband, my cousin Nina and her 3 kids. 9 cars, all from one direction. I found my mother Loretta, 71, in the good blue dress, sitting in the shade of the stucco building with her purse in her lap, because she doesn't like to set a purse down, and I asked her if she'd heard from anybody. She said Nina had texted her that morning and that Nina was always late, which was true. Nina has been late to everything since 1998. My mother said, "They'll come." I tried to text Royce. It sat there with the little clock on it and didn't send. Now, the cell service out at Vasquez Grove was always bad. That's not a detail I'm dressing up. There's one tower off Avenue 96, and if you stand behind the stucco building, you get nothing. Half the reason the venue was cheap was that nobody could live stream from it. So a text not sending at Vasquez Grove was the least alarming thing in the world. I told myself, 9 cars, one direction, one highway, one wreck. That's arithmetic that closes. There's a wreck on 43. They're sitting in it. I want to say clearly that I was right. There was something on 43. I was right about the shape of it and wrong about the content. And being right about the shape is what kept me calm for another 2 hours. We got married at 4 minutes past 6. It took 11 minutes. I know because Wes's nephew Emmett, who was 9, had been given a job of holding a little clock, which was a thing his mother invented to keep him busy, and he announced the time when it was over like he was calling a horse race. I remember Wes's hands were hot. I remember the fans going in the corners of the pole barn, that low airplane sound they make. I remember that 120 chairs is a lot of chairs and that maybe 90 of them had somebody in them. I remember looking out at the gap where my side of the family should have been and being annoyed, genuinely just annoyed. The small, ugly annoyance of having planned something and had people not show up for it. I remember my mother crying, and Wes's mother Junie holding her hand, and Carl Bauman in the back with his hat off, and Ty, Wes's younger brother, filming on his phone and then giving up because he had no bars. I'd like to have that back those 11 minutes and about 20 minutes after as something other than what it is now, which is a thing I mostly remember for the light. At 6:35, Royce came in and told me about the wreck, and I believed him. At 6:52, Manny Portillo came in and told me there was no wreck. Here's what I did with that, and I've thought about it more than anything else. I did not go find Royce and put him next to Manny and make them talk to each other. I had 100 people to feed. I told Manny where the drinks were, and I went and asked Bev Sandoval, who did our catering out of calendar, to start plating. And it was another 20 minutes before the contradiction came back to me and would not leave. Because here's the thing about the two accounts. If Royce had been the second one and Manny the first, I'd have understood it fine. Cars stop, then CHP arrives, then there's a wreck scene and a detour. That's a road clearing up. That's the world working, but it was backwards. The patrol cars came first and then they weren't there anymore. The organized version came first and then the disorganized one. Whatever was on that highway, it had gotten less managed in 17 minutes, not more. I went and found Royce with a plate in his hand and asked him, specifically, "Did you actually see a wreck? Did you see a vehicle?" He thought about it and said no. He said he saw patrol cars with their lights going and he saw traffic being turned, and he assumed. He said the officer he went past wasn't directing traffic. He was standing at his open door talking on the radio. He said, and this is where my chest went tight, that there were two of them standing behind their cars and not out in the road. I said, behind their cars. He said, yeah, like using them. And then he said, I don't know, D. I was thinking about being late. Aunt Charlotte came in around 7 with a crack across the bottom of her windshield in a long, shallow curve. She'd been the last of the South group to leave, and she'd come a different way, up through Poso Junction, and she was rattled and embarrassed and kept apologizing for the state of her hair. She said a man had hit her windshield with his hand at the four-way in Poso and that she'd rolled through the stop and gotten out of there. She said it like it was a story about a drunk. She said, on a Saturday at 6 o'clock, and shook her head. Somebody at her table said it was probably drift. I need to explain that word because it became the single most important word of that night, and I don't think people outside the valley understand how much weight it can carry. Drift is when an application, a spray, a fumigant, whatever's going on the field, moves off target, wind comes up, or an aerial applicator is sloppy, or somebody sprays at the wrong hour, and it lands on a road, a house, a school, a crew, in the next block. It happens. It has happened in that county, badly enough that people remember the years. And when it happens, people get sick in a group, all at once, in a way that looks strange from the outside. Headaches, vomiting, confusion, people wandering, roads get closed, officials get vague on purpose. Nobody says anything for 2 days. So when word started moving around that pole barn that something was wrong on 43, and people were acting strange and the highway was blocked, the explanation was sitting right there, already loaded. It's drift. Somebody sprayed with the wind up. It'll pass. It always passes. I cannot overstate how much that idea cost us. Not because it was stupid, because it was reasonable and local and had precedent, and it came with a built-in instruction. Stay where you are. Close your windows. Wait it out. Drift is a thing you shelter from. Drift moves through and is gone. By 7 o'clock, the pole barn had 2 conversations going in it. One was a wedding. The other was 6 or 7 men standing at the open end with their phones out, holding them up. And Ty saying he had 1 bar and then no bars. And Carl saying the tower's overloaded. Everybody's calling at once. And that's when my brother drove into the lot. Dale is 6 years older than me. I had not seen him in 3 years and 2 months. He was not invited. Exactly. My mother had mailed him an invitation to an address in Bakersfield she wasn't sure was current. And no RSVP had come back, and I had let that be the end of it because I didn't want to spend my wedding managing whether he showed. He came down the gravel in a white 3/4 ton with a magnetic sign on the door. Sumner Irrigation District. He was in a gray work shirt with his name over the pocket and jeans and boots, and he had not shaved, and he was dusty to the knee. He parked at the far end, away from everybody, and sat in the truck for probably a minute and a half before he got out. I met him halfway across the gravel in my dress. He said, "You got married?" I said, "About an hour ago." He said, "I'm not, I know." We stood there. I want to tell you there was something in it. There wasn't. It was two people in a parking lot in the heat. I asked what he was doing there, and he said he'd been closing check gates on the number 4 lateral over by Road 20, and the crew channel had gone strange, guys asking each other about 43 being shut. And one of the district guys said something about calendar, and he remembered the date off the invitation. He said, "It was on my refrigerator." He was not a contractor for the district in any impressive way. I want to be clear about this because of how it sounds. Dale sprayed weeds on canal banks and maintained gate hardware for an outfit that had a service contract with the district. He was not an engineer. He had no authority. What he had, and the only thing he had, was a ring of keys. We got to the other part fast because there was no time for the slow version and because Dale has never in his life been able to hold a thing back once he's decided to say it. He said, standing there, "I still owe you $2,100, which is not the number I had in my head. The number in my head was $4,100. That was what Dad's flatbed sold for over what Dad's card balance was. And Dale had taken the truck to sell it and then not come back with the difference. And then he'd stopped calling, and then a month became a year became 3, and by then the not calling was itself the thing, bigger than the money. I said, "It's 41. He said, "I know it's 41. I've got 2,100. That's the whole explanation. That's all of it. There was no story. He hadn't been in trouble, he hadn't been sick, he hadn't been anywhere interesting. He'd been in Bakersfield the entire time, 40 minutes away, working, and it had gotten easier every month not to call, until calling would have required explaining why he hadn't called. I have thought about that for a long time, and the part that stays with me is how disappointing it was. I'd built something in 3 years. A reason. He hadn't built anything. He just let time pass. But there was no room for it, because right then, Ty came out into the lot and said, loud, that the AM station out of the county seat was running an advisory. Avoid State Route 43 between Ellinger and the county line. Traffic incident, seek alternate routes. Nothing else. No cause. And Manny said, from behind him, that the frontage road looked shut too when he came past, and he hadn't wanted to say anything during dinner. Dale said, "You can't go east either." I said, "Why not?" He said because he'd come from the east, off Road 20, and the sheriff had 2 units across the road at the calendar turnoff. And he'd only gotten through because of the district sign on his door and because the deputy waved him by without asking. He said the deputy didn't tell him anything. He said the deputy looked like he was about 19. So, that was the box. South, closed. East, closed. North was the Pistachio Holler and then 11 miles of orchard to a county road that fed back to 43 above Ellinger, which was the part of 43 that Manny had driven through with people standing outside their cars. West was open ground, then the canal, then more open ground, then nothing for a long way. And Dale said, "There's the canal road." I need to explain this too, or none of it makes sense. The Sumner Irrigation District runs a main canal roughly north to south along the west side of that country. It's a concrete line channel, maybe 40 feet across at the top, moving water most of the year. On the east bank, there's a service road graded dirt and gravel, wide enough for 1 district truck, built for the ditch tenders and the maintenance crews. It runs the whole length. It's fenced off from the public and gated at every single place a county road crosses it, and the gates are locked, and there are a lot of gates. That road goes north, uninterrupted by traffic, for about 38 miles, past every closure and every jam, and comes out at the top of the district where the canal meets the intake works, near a state highway that runs east into the foothills. It is not a secret. Anybody who's driven in that county has seen it and wondered about it. What people don't have is the keys. Dale had the keys. 16 locks, all district hardware, some of them combination, most of them keyed, on a ring the size of a grapefruit that lived in his truck. He also knew, and this turned out to be the thing that mattered most, where you could and could not fit. Because here's the problem with a canal. Where a county road crosses the canal, the road goes over a bridge. And the service road doesn't go up over the road, it ducks under the bridge, through a low opening between the concrete abutment and the water, and comes out the other side. That's how you drive 38 miles without stopping. You go under everything. Those openings are low. Dale said the lowest one on that stretch was under the Avenue 88 bridge, and it was about 7.4. And there was one at the siphon crossing near Road 24 that was worse, maybe 6.11. And the district's own trucks had a sticker on the dash telling the operators which crossings they could take with a rack on and which they couldn't. A pickup fits. A pickup with a lumber rack might not. A camper shell is a question. A travel trailer, a box truck, a shuttle bus, a fifth wheel. No, not a chance. Not 1 inch of a chance. And more than that, if somebody wedges a tall vehicle under one of those bridges, in the dark, on a 1-lane dirt road with a concrete canal on one side and a drop on the other, then nothing behind that vehicle goes anywhere ever again. There's no turning around. There's no going around. The road is the width of the road. Dale laid all of that out to me and Wes and Ty standing at the tailgate of his truck in about 4 minutes, in the flattest voice you ever heard, like a man explaining a work order. He wasn't excited. He didn't think he was rescuing anybody. He'd driven over there because he thought his sister was getting married 4 miles from something and might not know it, and now he was telling us the only thing he happened to know. Wes said, "How many vehicles can go?" And Dale said, "As many as fit. It's not about how many, it's about who's in front of who." That was the whole problem, right there, and I didn't hear it. I heard a solution. We had 130-some people in that pole barn, and somewhere between 50 and 60 vehicles in the lot, and I had just been handed a road. I made a decision at that tailgate that I would make again, and that I still don't know how to feel about. I decided to tell everybody. Angela View, my closest friend, who works in the transportation office for the school district and has spent 20 years moving buses and children around and knows exactly how badly a group of adults can behave, Ang said to me, quietly, before I went up. "You need to sort it first. Tell them after you've sorted it." I said, "We can't sort 130 people without telling them why." She said, "Then tell them and lose them." She was right, and I did it anyway, because I could not stand in front of my husband's entire family and my own mother and quietly pick 19 of them. I did not have the standing. Nobody had elected me. I had been married for 1 hour. Half those people had known me for 6 years and thought of me as Wes's girlfriend, who finally made it official. The other half were mine and would have followed me into a fire. I stood up on a chair by the cake table and I turned off the music and I told them 43 was shut both directions, that the East Road out of Callender had deputies across it, that we didn't know what was happening but that 2 people had driven the same stretch of highway 20 minutes apart and described 2 different things, and that the second one was worse. I said there was a route north along the canal that we had keys for. I said it was slow, maybe 15 miles an hour, maybe 4 hours, and that it was 1 lane and dirt, and that anything over about 6.5 feet tall could not go, and that if anything got stuck under a bridge, everybody behind it was done. And then I said the part I had rehearsed for maybe 90 seconds and should have rehearsed for an hour. I said, "I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm telling you what we've got." The room came apart in about 4 minutes. I've thought a great deal about why. I don't think anyone in that barn was stupid or cowardly. I think what happened is what always happens when you hand a large group an option with a cost attached and no authority behind it. It didn't split into people who believed me and people who didn't. It split into 5 or 6 knots of people, each one solving a different problem. There was the drift group, and they were the biggest, and they were led not officially, but in the way these things happen by an older man named Delbert, who had farmed out by Ellinger his whole life and had been through the 1999 incident. He said, and he was calm and he was kind about it, that if there's an application event you do not drive into it, you get inside, you shut the swamp cooler off, you wait for it to move through, and you certainly do not drive 38 miles up an open canal bank at night with your windows down. He said we had a concrete building with bathrooms and running water and 400 pounds of catered food and 130 people, and that in the morning somebody would tell us what happened. I could not argue with that. I still can't, entirely. He was giving the best available answer to a question that had been asked wrong. There was the wait for official word group, which overlapped with the drift group but wasn't the same, and they mostly wanted to know why. If this was serious, nobody had said so. Somebody's phone had gotten a text through and there was nothing on it. Ty said the AM station was still running the same 40-second advisory on a loop. And that's a fair point too. In a county like that, when something real happens, you hear it. Your neighbor calls. The scanner app lights up. And there was nothing. There was just less and less signal. There was the paved route group, 4 or 5 families who said if the canal goes north, then Avenue 88 also goes north eventually, and they'd rather be on asphalt where they could turn around than on a levee where they couldn't. That was Manny, and a couple of the shop guys and 2 families from Callender who wanted to go home to their own houses, which is the most human thing in the world, and which I did not even try to talk them out of. And there was Carl. Carl Bauman is my father-in-law. He is 73, and he sold 240 cows in 2016, and has never entirely recovered from it. And that 5th-wheel trailer hitched to his dually in that gravel lot was the single thing he had bought for himself in about a decade. He and Junie had spent 9 days at Morro Bay in it. It was paid off in March. Carl said, and he said it without any heat at all, that he was not going to unhitch a 34-foot trailer in a citrus grove and leave it and drive off up a ditch bank in the dark, and that if things were as bad as I thought, then a trailer with a bed and a stove and a water tank was the best thing anybody in that lot had. And that was also correct. That's the part people don't want to hear. Carl was right about his trailer. In almost every scenario, that isn't the one that happened. Carl was right. Junie asked me, and she asked me in front of maybe 30 people, which I don't think she meant as a trap. But it functioned as one. She asked me, "Delia, honey, do you actually know something, or do you just have a bad feeling?" And I had to say out loud, in my dress, that I did not know anything. Ong told me later that's the moment it was over. She said the second I admitted I was guessing, the room stopped being a group and turned back into 130 individuals, each one free to make their own call, which is exactly what they'd been the whole time and what I'd briefly forgotten. 40 minutes went by. I want that on the record too, because I've heard versions of this story where the hero speaks and everybody moves. 40 minutes went by in that barn with people arguing about pesticide drift and cell towers while the light went out of the sky. At about 5 to 8, I stopped trying to move everybody. That's the decision, not the announcement. The stopping. I got down off the chair and I went out to the lot and I found Wes and Dale and Ang and Ty, and I said, "We're taking who's ready." Nobody said anything for a second, and then Ty said, "Rochelle won't leave without Mom and Dad." And I said, "Then Rochelle isn't going." I said it to my husband's brother about my husband's wife's about his wife, an hour into being a Bauman. I said it flat. I don't remember deciding to be that cold. It came out that way. Here's what we did in the next 20 minutes, and it was the most useful 20 minutes of the whole night. And it was also the ugliest. Wes got the tape measure out of his shop truck, a 25-foot Stanley off the passenger floorboard, and we went down the line of vehicles in that lot with a flashlight and measured heights. You have never seen anything more absurd or more clarifying. Me in a wedding dress with the hem already gray, holding one end of a tape measure at the top of a light bar. Wes calling out numbers. Dale standing there with the key ring saying yes or no like a man checking loads at a scale house. A stock half-ton is 6'2", 6'4". Fine. Wes's F15065. Fine. My Corolla, obviously. My mother's Buick. Ang's RAV467. Fine. Ty's truck was lifted with a rack and it came out at 7.5, and Dale said Avenue 88? No. Ty took the rack off with a socket set in about 9 minutes while his wife stood there not speaking to me. Aunt Charlotte's Camry with the cracked windshield. Fine. Bev Sandoval's box truck, 12 feet 6. Bev had $1,100 of rented convection equipment in that truck and a business that was 4 years old. She stood there with her hands on her hips and did the math out loud, and then she said, "Can I ride?" and got in with Ang, and she left the truck sitting in the gravel with the keys on the front tire, and she never got it back. Carl's dually would have fit. The trailer would not. He didn't measure. Somebody's Silverado with a shell. I've forgotten whose came out at 6:11, and Dale said the Road 24 siphon was about 6:11 and he wasn't going to bet on it. And that family went and stood with Delbert's group. 11 vehicles and 31 people, out of 50-some vehicles and 133. I want to name the ugliest part, because if I skip it, the rest is just a story about a road. Junie asked me to wait 10 minutes. Ty's wife Rochelle had a sister who'd driven back into Callender at 7 to get a phone charger from her own house and hadn't come back yet. Junie asked me to hold the line 10 minutes for her. She wasn't hysterical. She asked me the way you ask somebody to hold an elevator. And I said no. I said it was going to be full dark, and that the first 4 gates were the slow ones, and that Dale wanted us under Avenue 88 before we lost all the light because of the way the road drops on the approach. That was a true reason. It was a good reason. 10 minutes at the front of a 4-hour drive is nothing, and I knew that even as I said it, and I said no anyway, because I had spent 40 minutes being unable to move 130 people, and I was not going to spend 1 more minute being unable to move 31. I've never been able to work out whether the 10 minutes would have mattered. Nobody can tell me. That's the whole trouble with it. If it clearly hadn't mattered, I could put it down. Rochelle's sister did come back, about 20 minutes after we left. We pulled out of Vasquez Grove at 8:15 with the sky orange in the west and the string lights still on in the pole barn behind us, and probably 90 people standing in the gravel watching us go. Some of them waved. Delbert waved. That's what I keep from that part. An old man in a good shirt lifting his hand to a line of cars leaving a wedding. Dale led in the district truck. Wes and I were second in his F-150 with my mother in the back seat, because I would not let her drive her own car in a convoy at night, and Ang drove the Buick with Bev and Aunt Charlotte. Then Ty and Rochelle and the 2 kids and Ty's dog, a red heeler named Pilot, who spent the entire night with his chin on the center console. Then 7 more. 2 miles west on Avenue 96, and then a right turn onto nothing. A gravel apron with a chain-link gate and a fence and a district sign about trespassing. Dale got out with the key ring, and he had to try 4 keys, and that was the first time I felt real fear, watching my brother stand in headlights trying keys on a lock while 11 vehicles idled behind him. The gate opened. We went through. Somebody behind us closed it, which Dale had asked for and which I had thought was pointless and which was not. And then we were on the canal. I don't know how to convey what that drive was like. It was 38 miles at 15 miles an hour, which is 2.5 hours if nothing goes wrong, and things went wrong. The road is dirt and it's crowned, and there's a berm on the water side that you cannot see over from a car. So the canal is just a presence, a wide dark absence off your left shoulder. And every so often the headlights catch water and it's flat and moving, and it looks like a road that's melted. The dust was the first real problem. 11 vehicles on a dry-graded road in September makes a wall. By the 3rd mile, the cars in back couldn't see anything. We had to spread out to about 6 or 7 car lengths, and then we couldn't see each other's tail lights, and then we were 11 separate vehicles on a road instead of a convoy. Dale had said to keep our windows up, which nobody wanted to do in that heat, and the ones who rolled them down got coated. Somebody's kid started throwing up from the dust and the motion, around mile 8. We stopped at every gate, 16 of them. At each gate, Dale got out, unlocked, walked back to make sure the line was closed up, waved us through, and then the last vehicle's driver got out and locked it again behind us. 2 minutes if it went well. 6 or 7 if a lock was stiff, and half of them were stiff, and Dale went through most of a can of penetrating oil he had in the toolbox. That's 40 minutes of the night right there, just standing at gates. At the 5th gate, near Avenue 84, I did the thing that cost us the most, and I did it because I was trying to be smart. Dale had 2 sets, the full district ring and an older partial set in a coffee can in his toolbox, maybe 9 keys. The ones he used most, that a previous guy had cut and never turned in. I took the partial set and gave it to a man named Gus Herrera, who was driving 11th, at the back, so that if the line got broken, the tail end could still work gates on its own. That was good thinking. It was correct. The problem is that Gus turned back at mile 14. His wife had gotten badly frightened in the dust, and there was a place at Avenue 80 where a gate led out onto a paved crossing and you could get off, and Gus got off. He came up alongside at the gate and told Dale he was going to take the pavement into Ellinger and go to his brother-in-law's. Dale said all right, and they drove out through that gate and turned east, and neither of them thought about the keys in the coffee can on the seat, and neither did I, because I was standing 11 vehicles up in the dark, holding my mother's arm while she got her balance. We lost the tail-end key set at mile 14. Under the Avenue 88 bridge, the road drops maybe 8 feet in 50 and then swings hard left into the opening under the abutment, and you cannot see the opening until you are committed to the turn. Dale went first and then stood on the far side with a flashlight waving each vehicle through one at a time, and it took 20 minutes to move 10 vehicles 100 feet. Ty's truck, with the rack off, cleared it by what he said was about 4 inches, and what I saw and would have called 2. It was in the middle of that, standing on the concrete apron with the water going by 3 feet away and making that hollow sound water makes in a lined channel, that my phone lit up in my hand for the first time in 2 hours. 9:41 at night. A wireless emergency alert. All caps. The horrible tone that makes your body react before your mind does. Civil emergency. Shelter in place. Avoid travel. Monitor local media. That's all it said. That is the entire text of the only official communication I received that night, 5.5 hours after Royce sat in traffic on 43. Wes read it over my shoulder and said, "Monitor what local media?" And my mother, from the truck, with her purse in her lap, said, "Well, they're not going to say." We came out from under Avenue 88 at 10:15, and about a mile north of it we lost the Ortegas. There's a place on that canal where a lateral branches off to the east, a smaller channel, and it has its own service road. And at night, in dust, with the main road bending slightly right, the branch road looks like the main road. It looks more like the main road than the main road does. Danny and Priya Ortega were 7th in line. They'd been at my wedding because Danny had worked with Wes for 2 years before he went to work at the AG chemical warehouse. They had a 9-year-old and Priya's father in the car. They took the branch. Nobody saw it happen. The car in front of them was too far ahead in the dust, and the car behind them just followed the road they were on, which was correct, and the gap closed and nobody counted. We noticed at the next gate, which was maybe 22 minutes later, because Dale counted vehicles at every gate and got 10 instead of 11. We backed down that road, that's what it took. 3 vehicles reversing a half mile on a levee in the dark to make room to sort ourselves out. And we went back to the branch, and about 600 yards down the lateral their headlights were sitting there in the dark. Stopped, and they'd figured it out. And they were turning around. And then Danny came out on foot and stood on the far bank and yelled across at us, and we realized we could not get to each other. Because the lateral is a channel, too. It's smaller, maybe 15 feet across, and it wasn't running full, but it was concrete lined with vertical walls and no ladder and no fence line and no crossing anywhere in either direction that we could reach without going back through 2 gates and around. The road they were on and the road we were on were 4 car lengths apart, and there was water between them, and there was no way to bridge 4 car lengths in the dark with what we had. Dale said there was a check structure with a walkway about 2 miles down. Danny said he'd drive down to it. We said we'd meet him. We waited at that spot for 35 minutes. There is a version of this where I tell you what happened to the Ortegas, and I can't because I don't know. They never came up. Dale went back down the main road to the nearest gate to try to get onto the lateral road from the other side, and the gate at that crossing was one of the ones on the partial set, and the partial set was in a coffee can on the seat of Gus Herrera's truck, 14 miles behind us, driving into Ellinger. We cut the chain instead. Wes had bolt cutters in the shop truck, actual bolt cutters, 24-inch, because he changes tractor tires, and it took him 4 minutes to get through a hardened chain, and he tore the web of his hand doing it. By then it was 11:20, and the Ortegas' lights weren't visible down the lateral anymore. Dale drove a mile and a half down that access with Ty and came back and said the car wasn't there and the road forked twice more and he wasn't going to keep going with the fuel he had. Ty said out loud, standing in the road, "We can't be down here all night for 4 people." Rochelle didn't speak to him for 2 days. I made the call to go on. I want to own that clearly, because at the time nobody argued with me, and afterward everybody remembered it as something that just happened. It didn't just happen. I said, "We're going," and we went. The Road 24 siphon was at about 1 in the morning. That's where the canal goes under a road in a big concrete structure. And the service road threads through a gap that is genuinely uncomfortable. You can hear the water below you going into the barrel. This deep pull of a sound, and the opening is low enough that Wes folded the mirrors in. There was a vehicle parked on the far side of it. On the levee, in the road, nose toward us. A small white sedan with the driver's door open and the interior light on. Dale stopped 100 yards short and got out and stood in his own headlights and looked at it for a long time. I got out too. My dress at that point was gray to the knee, and I'd taken my shoes off hours ago, and I was standing in road dust in bare feet. There was somebody sitting on the berm about 30 feet past the car, just sitting on the slope, facing the water, in the dark, at 1 in the morning, 14 miles from any town. Inside a locked district right of way. Dale called out. Twice. Nothing. The person didn't turn around. Didn't stand. There was a movement to the shoulders. A small, continuous motion, like somebody rocking or like somebody working at something in their lap. Wes came up and said, "How'd they get in here?" And Dale said, "Same as us." That was the moment for me. Not the highway, not the alert. Not the 2 accounts. Somebody had gotten through a district gate onto a locked service road and left their car door open and walked 30 feet and sat down. We had to get past. There was no other way north. The road was the width of the road, and that sedan was on it. Dale got back in his truck and eased forward, and we all came behind him, and there was about 4 feet of clearance between the sedan and the berm. And he pushed the sedan's open door shut with the front of his brush guard as he came by. Slow, without stopping, and every one of us threaded that gap one at a time with our windows up, and the person on the berm never turned around. Nobody in 10 vehicles said a word on the other side. Emmett, who was 9, asked his mother if that was a fisherman. We got to the pump 9 yard at 2:40 in the morning. That wasn't the plan. The plan was 38 miles to the top of the district. We stopped at 29 because the Peterson family's minivan had been running hot for the last hour on that road in that heat, and it finally started throwing steam at the last gate. And because we had 2 children asleep and one 71-year-old woman who had been sitting upright in a truck for 6.5 hours, and because Dale said there was water there. Pump 9 is a district maintenance yard. If you drove past on the county road, you would not see it, because it's a 1/4 mile off, down a dirt spur, behind a windbreak of old eucalyptus, between a Valencia block on one side and a fallow field on the other. There's no sign on the county road. There's a chain-link fence with 3 strands of barbed on top and a gate with a district lock. Inside, there's a metal checkhouse building, maybe 40 by 60, with a roll-up bay and a swamp cooler on the roof. A shop area with a bench and a parts cabinet, a small office with a desk and a wall of laminated schematics, a fenced chemical shed we never opened, 2 above-ground fuel tanks, a portable toilet that got serviced monthly, and a domestic well with its own pressure tank that fed a spigot, a utility sink, and an eye wash station, and a pump plant, which is what it's actually for. Moving water from the main canal into a regulating basin that serves 4 laterals. It solved one problem completely. There was water, good water, cold out of the ground, unlimited as long as there was power for the pressure pump, and there was. And when the grid finally dropped 4 days later, there was a small diesel set on a skid for the shop and 200 gallons of dyed diesel in the tank. And it created 2 problems immediately, and both of them turned out to be more serious than water ever was. The first was food. We had, in 10 vehicles, whatever Bev had grabbed off the plating table in 12 minutes. 4 hotel pans of tri-tip, most of a pan of rice, a lot of dinner rolls, 2 bus tubs of salad, and the top 2 tiers of a wedding cake, plus whatever was in people's cars. Ang had a Costco pack of granola bars in her trunk from a school event. Tai had a case of water and half a bag of dog food. 26 people, no refrigeration except 2 ice chests, 102-degree days. We ate very well for 2 days, which is a strange thing to remember. We ate catered tri-tip and wedding cake sitting on the concrete floor of a pump house at 3 in the morning. And by Tuesday, we were eating rolls and canned green beans that Bev found in a cabinet in the shop office, left there by some crew years ago. The second problem was the one nobody thinks of, and it was the one that ended us. Pump 9 was safe because nobody knew about it. That's all. It wasn't fortified. Chain link is a suggestion. The building was sheet metal. There was 1 roll-up door and 1 man door and a bank of windows in the office. Anybody who wanted in was getting in. What we had was obscurity. We were behind a windbreak, off a spur, off a county road, in a place with no sign. And roughly 40 people in Sumner County had a key to that gate. Dale told me that the first morning while we were figuring out where people were going to sleep. He said it without any particular weight. District operators, the maintenance crew, 2 contractors, whoever the district had given keys to over the years and never collected them back. He said, every ditch tender north of Ellinger knows this yard. I said, so people might come. He said, people are going to come. We were there 11 days. I'm not going to give you all 11, because most of it was heat and boredom and the specific misery of 26 people sharing 1 portable toilet. But there are things worth telling. The grid held until Wednesday. When it went, the swamp cooler went with it, because the shop generator wasn't big enough for the cooler and the pressure pump both, and we chose the pump. That was the first real vote we took, and it wasn't close. The building was unlivable from about 10 in the morning until 7 at night. Metal building, no insulation, no airflow. So we lived outside under the eucalyptus during the day, and inside at night, which is backwards from how you'd expect. And we hung wet towels over the office windows and slept on the concrete because concrete is cooler than a cot. Wes's hand got infected from the chain cutting. Not badly. Aunt Charlotte cleaned it twice a day with the eye wash station and a bottle of peroxide from somebody's glove box, and it turned to color and then turned back. That's as close as we came to a medical emergency, and I have thought many times about how much luck was in that. Pilot the dog was worth every ounce of the food we spent on him, and I say that as somebody who argued against bringing him. He slept across the doorway of the office at night, and he woke us up twice for coyotes, and once for something else. On the 4th day, a district foreman named Ruben Salas came up the spur in a district truck. Pilot heard him before we did. We had about 90 seconds. There is no plan you can make in 90 seconds with 26 people, and we didn't make one. Everybody just got behind the building, which is what people actually do. Ruben got out and stood in the yard and looked at 10 civilian vehicles parked in a maintenance yard and said, "Dale?" They talked for maybe half an hour, sitting on the tailgate. He wasn't hostile. He was a 50-year-old man who'd been running gates alone for 4 days because most of his crew hadn't come in, and who had a wife in Ellinger he hadn't been able to reach, and who mainly wanted somebody to tell him what he was supposed to do. He said the intake works at the top of the district where we'd been headed had National Guard on it, and they weren't letting anybody through in either direction, and that if we'd driven the full 38 miles, we'd have arrived at 2 in the morning at a gate with soldiers behind it and nowhere to turn around on a 1-lane levee. That's the second time luck did our thinking for us. We stopped at 29 miles because a minivan overheated. He said the district was still trying to run water because the district always tries to run water. That's the whole religion of the place. He said he'd been told nothing official. He said the radio was still saying almost nothing. And he said the word out along the canal was that it had started somewhere south, and it wasn't drift. He didn't stay. He said he had 4 more structures to check, and he'd be back around. He told us not to open the chemical shed and not to touch the pump controls, and he wrote a phone number on the back of a work order that never once connected to anything. Dale went with him. I need to be honest about this because I've heard myself tell it dishonestly. Dale did not sacrifice himself. He did not ride off to save us. Ruben Salas needed a second man to run gate structures, and Dale was a man who ran gate structures, and the water was still moving, and somebody had to move it. And Dale had a full ring of keys, and Ruben had lost half his. He came and found me at the water tank about an hour before they left. He said he'd be back in a couple of days. He gave me the combination for the yard gate on a piece of paper, and I wrote it on the inside of my wrist in marker because I was afraid of losing paper. And the ink sweated off, and I rewrote it every morning for a week. He said, "I've got the 2100 in an account at Valley First." I said, "Dale." He said, "I'm just telling you it's there." That's the last conversation I had with my brother. Not a reconciliation. A man telling me where his money was because he didn't know how to say anything else, and because I hadn't given him any way in either. I had 11 days of standing next to him in a pump yard, and I used none of them because there was always something: the towels, the toilet, the diesel, Emmett's sunburn. And because I did not want to have the conversation in front of 25 people, and because part of me wanted him to have to ask. He'd been 40 minutes away for 3 years. I'd known that the whole time, too. I had a phone. 2 men from the district came through 9 days later and said Dale was working out of the north yard above the intake and that things were locked down up there. That's the last I heard, and by then we had moved twice, and there was no way to send a message to a maintenance yard on the other side of a guard checkpoint. He isn't dead, as far as I know. He's just gone again, the same way he was gone before, and I can't work out whether that's a relief or the exact thing I should have prevented. The group came apart between day 6 and day 11, and it came apart gently, which surprised me. I'd been braced for it to come apart badly. The Petersons went first. Their minivan was fixed. Ty and Wes between them had it running on a hose clamp and a jug of water, and Sharon Peterson had a brother with a place up above Springville in the foothills. And she'd decided on day 3 that she was going there. And once she'd decided it, she was going to go whether the roads were open or not. They took 2 others with them. 9 people down to 19. Bev Sandoval and Aunt Charlotte went on day 8 east because Reuben had said the county road out that way was clear as of Tuesday, and because Bev had a mother in a care home in Porterville and had spent 6 days not talking about it. Ang went with them and came back 2 days later alone and told me what she'd seen on that road, and I've never repeated it, and I'm not going to. Ty and Rochelle and the kids went on day 10. That one wasn't gentle. Rochelle had spent 10 days in a metal building with the woman who had refused to wait 10 minutes for her sister, and she had been decent about it. And on day 10 she stopped being decent about it, and I stood in the yard and let her say all of it, because she had every right to, and because there wasn't any answer. She said her sister came back 20 minutes after we left. She said, "You could see the taillights. You could still see you leaving." She's probably right that you could. They went south, back down the canal, with the second gate key Dale had left, toward Vasquez Grove and then toward the Balmain place at Ellinger. We found out in November what they found. 90-some people had stayed in that pole barn for about a day and a half, and then they'd gone in every direction, mostly toward their own houses, which is what people do. Delbert died. 2 others from that group died. Carl and Junie made it to the dairy in the 5th wheel and were there 4 weeks before Carl got sick. And Carl is alive, and Junie is alive, and Carl does not use his left arm properly anymore. And none of that had anything to do with any decision I made in that grove. That's the thing I did not expect. I had it in my head that I had chosen 31 people to live and 90-some to die. And that's not what happened. Some of the people I left came through fine and are farming. 2 of the people I took are dead now, from things that happened long after Pump 9. The road I found wasn't salvation, and the barn wasn't a grave. It was just 2 different sets of odds, and I didn't get to see either set clearly, and I still made everybody stand in a parking lot and choose. The Baumans have been civil to me for 4 years. That's the right word. Civil. Junie sends a card at Christmas with our 2 names on it. Carl talks to Wes about hay and does not talk to me about anything, and never once has he said a word about that night. And I would honestly rather he yelled. Wes and I are still married. He has never blamed me. That has its own weight to it that I didn't anticipate being married to a man who watched his whole family get sorted by a tape measure, and who chose the side of the tape I was standing on, and who has to live in a county with those people, and who never brings it up. Sometimes I want him to. He won't. Ang says the mistake wasn't the 10 minutes and wasn't the announcement. She says the mistake was thinking that 130 people who trusted me individually would act like a group because I stood on a chair. She says she watched school administrators make that same mistake for 20 years. Maybe. I don't know that I could have done the other thing. I don't know that I could have gone table to table in that pole barn, quietly, picking, while the music was still on. We left Pump 9 on the 11th day. The four of us, me, Wes, my mother, and a man named Curtis Boyd, who'd come to my wedding as somebody's plus one, and who I'd barely spoken to before that night and who lived with us for the next 2 years. We went to a place 40 miles northeast that belonged to a customer of Kettner Pump who owed the company a favor and honored it, which is the whole reason we had anywhere to go, and it was not safe there either, and we moved again in February. I've been asked whether I'd take the canal road again. Yes, obviously yes. It was the only thing anybody had. I've been asked whether I'd tell everybody again. That one I don't answer. Here's the last piece of that night, and it isn't dramatic, and I've never known where to put it in the telling. On the third evening at Pump 9, before Reuben came, before Dale left, I went out to hang wet towels over the office windows for the night, which was my job because I'd invented it. The sun was down behind the Valencias, and the metal of the building was still throwing heat, and the water in the basin was making that low sound it makes, and a vehicle came down the spur. I could hear it before I could see its tires on that dirt, that specific gravel crunch, slowing at the windbreak. Everybody inside went quiet. Pilot came around the corner of the building stiff-legged and didn't bark, which was worse than barking. I put the wet towel over my shoulder, and I walked out to the gate with the keys in my hand, because somebody had to, and because I was the one standing outside.